Hi, my parents left me a rotting house full of ghosts and gave my brother the family estate like I never existed. But what hurts most? It wasn't the mold on the walls or the debt hidden under the floorboards. It was realizing they planned it that way. Every birthday, every hug, every silent dinner, they were just setting the stage. And by the time I uncovered the truth, I wasn't just left behind. I was erased. Before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? Morning coffee? Late night walk? Drop it in the comments. We're about to dig up secrets some families bury for generations. Ready? Let's begin. The morning sky hung heavy with a pale gray that never quite gave way to sun. Spring in Vermont had a way of feeling like winter's stubborn echo. I parked behind Thorne's luxury SUV outside Uncle Merrill's law office, dust clinging to the hem of my coat as I stepped into the cold. The door chimed softly as I walked in. Inside, the office smelled of old paper and worn leather, just like our parents' library once had. Uncle Merrill, thinner than I remembered, rose stiffly from behind his desk and nodded. His eyes, bloodshot, maybe from grief, maybe from reading too much legalese, met mine with something like apology. I muttered, "Morning," and sat in the nearest chair, stiff-backed and polished, like everything else in here. Thorne strolled in 5 minutes late, draped in a camel hair coat, reeking of expensive cologne and manufactured confidence. "Derry!" he beamed, loud enough for the waiting room to hear. "Still driving that Civic?" I didn't answer. He leaned down to squeeze my shoulder like we were close, like he hadn't left me to change Dad's IVs and listen to Mom forget her own birthday. Uncle Merrill cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The rest of the family trickled in. Distant cousins, Aunt Meredith, a nephew whose name I never learned. I sat motionless, hands clasped, heart ticking louder with every passing second. Uncle Merrill opened a manila envelope and pulled out the document. His voice was steady, but I heard it crack just slightly as he read our parents' final words. "To our beloved son Thorne," he began, "we leave the Donovan estate, 18 acres on Lake Wilner, including the main house, all furnishings and assets therein." Murmurs rose. I felt my breath catch. "And to our son Darrow," he continued, "we leave the cottage at Maple Hollow and its contents in full." That was it. The cottage. The collapsing shell with moss in the roof and squirrels in the attic. The place we used for summer storage and forgotten furniture. There was a long pause, then Thorne chuckled. "Well," he said, stretching the word out like taffy, "guess they knew which one of us would actually do something with their legacy." He smiled around the room, like he'd just given a wedding toast. A few people chuckled, some didn't look up. My mouth stayed shut, but inside something trembled loose. I whispered more to myself than anyone. Maybe Mom thought I'd want to stay where I grew up. No one responded. The silence in that room was suffocating. By late afternoon, I was standing in front of the cottage. Wind tugged at my sleeves. The stairs groaned under my feet as I stepped onto the warped porch. The door stuck before giving way with a protesting creak. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, like it hadn't been disturbed since childhood. The living room was exactly as I remembered, except smaller, dimmer. I looked around, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Cobwebs in the corners, peeling wallpaper. My fingers trailed along the faded wood until I reached the mantel. There it was, a cracked ceramic vase, the blue glaze faded but still intact. I hadn't seen it in years. Dad glued it together after I knocked it off the shelf when I was 7. He'd knelt beside me that night and said, "You don't throw away what's cracked, you hold it tighter." I picked it up now, running my fingers over the fracture lines. The dust clung to my skin like a second layer of shame. I set it back and sank into the old creaky chair, the same one Dad fell asleep in every Sunday after church. Everything in this house whispered of them. Their voices still echoed in the walls if I listened hard enough. My chest ached. I thought of the promotions I'd turned down so I could drive Mom to her neurologist. The birthdays I missed with friends because Dad's hands were too weak to cut his meat. And this was what they left me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat still, breathing through clenched teeth. "Fine," I whispered. "If they thought this was all I deserved, I'll make it count." I didn't sleep that night. After sitting in that creaky chair for what felt like hours, Listening to the wind press against the walls like a restless spirit, I finally stood up. The quiet was too loud, too thick. Even the sound of rain tapping against the windows felt like it was accusing me of something I hadn't yet figured out. The floor groaned beneath my steps as I moved through the dark house. The hallway upstairs was narrow, sloped from years of settling. I grabbed the old flashlight I'd seen in the kitchen drawer earlier and made my way to the attic door. The chain pull light up there hadn't worked since I was a teenager, but I didn't need much to see. The stairs creaked louder than I remembered. Each step was a question. What are you looking for, Darrow? What do you think you'll find? The attic smelled like cedar and mildew, time bottled up in wooden beams and forgotten boxes. I swept the flashlight slowly across the space. There were trunks, mismatched luggage, a dusty sewing machine, stacks of magazines from the 80s. Then I saw it. A box tucked into the far corner, leather-bound, its surface cracked and worn. A tag, yellowed with age, was tied to the handle. Private, Eleanor's letters. Mom's name. I lowered myself beside it, cross-legged like I was back in high school. My hands hesitated on the lid. Whatever was inside, it felt like it had waited long enough. Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, faded greeting cards, and old postcards from places we'd never visited. At the bottom was a photograph, slightly curled at the edges, black and white, dated 1991 in neat pen. Mom stood beside a smiling man in a suit, holding a clipboard. The Donovan estate behind them looked freshly painted, the hedges sharp and manicured. She looked lighter, happier. Not the woman who'd spent her final years forgetting where she kept the sugar. I turned the photo over. 5 words. Closing done. Don't let them know about the trust setup. Esper Darrow. My chest tightened. I read it again. And again. It was her handwriting. No doubt. The flashlight trembled in my grip. I didn't understand. What trust? Why not me? My fingers fumbled through the rest of the box, but nothing else stood out. Just ordinary letters, bits of a life I thought I'd understood. But that note, those 5 words, split something in me. Not anger, not yet. Just the slow, painful awareness that maybe I'd never really known what was going on in this family. I sat there a long time, the rain falling harder now, drumming on the roof in waves. A memory bubbled up. Me at 10 years old, shipped off to summer camp while Thorne stayed behind. I thought it was just bad timing. Now I wondered if that was the plan all along. Keep me away. Keep me in the dark. I remembered one night, years ago, lying in bed, hearing raised voices in the hallway. Dad muttering something about changing the will before it's too late. Mom's voice sharp and panicked. I thought they were arguing about life insurance. I never asked. I ran my fingers along the photo's edge. It felt like holding a lie that had lived too long. Morning hadn't quite broken when my phone buzzed. Thorne, let's talk. You at the shack? The shack. That's what he called this place. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. I didn't know who I'd be responding to anymore. I set the phone down, walked back to the mantel, and lifted the old cracked vase, the same one Dad glued with his own hands. Underneath, I slid the photo, a secret resting beneath another. Let it sit there for now. I stood there for a while, staring at that photo hidden beneath the vase, like it might vanish if I blinked. A gust of wind moaned against the window pane, but inside the house was dead silent, as if it were waiting for me to take the next step. My stomach grumbled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I wandered into the kitchen, not really expecting to find much. The fridge was mostly empty, save for a box of old baking soda and a bottle of expired mustard. I poured a glass of water, the pipes groaning in protest. As I reached for a coffee mug from the high cabinet above the fridge, my hand brushed something wedged way in the back. I dragged over a chair to get a better look and discovered an old metal bread box, dented, cool to the touch. It looked like it hadn't been opened since the Clinton administration. I set it down on the counter, wiped off the dust, and clicked the latch open. Inside, a handful of torn envelopes, a ring of rusted keys, and, tucked neatly underneath, a manila folder. Across the front, in red marker, were 5 words that hit me like a punch to the chest. Final copy, not for Darrow. I stared at it. My name, in all caps, like it was some kind of curse word. I opened the folder with slow, deliberate fingers. The air around me suddenly felt thinner. Inside was a version of the will I'd never seen, different from the one Uncle Merrill had read just days ago. This one was typed, signed, and notarized, and it named both Thorne and me as co-inheritors of the family estate. Equal rights, equal property, equal respect. My hands trembled as I reread the page again, searching for a catch. There wasn't one. That version of the will hadn't even been mentioned. Not once. I drove straight into town. I didn't call ahead, didn't change clothes. I didn't care that my flannel shirt was wrinkled and stained with attic dust. I just needed answers. Carlisle's law office sat in the back corner of a 2-story brick building next to a florist's shop. A bell jingled when I opened the door. The receptionist gave me a tight smile. "Is Mr. Carlisle in?" She blinked at me like I'd asked if Elvis was available. "Let me check." A moment later, Carlisle emerged, still dressed in a blazer far too crisp for this early in the day. "Well, Darrow," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." I pulled the folder from under my coat and laid it on his desk. "Want to explain this?" His expression faltered, just for a second. Then he forced a chuckle, like we were old friends reminiscing over high school pranks. "Oh, that old version. Your father changed it shortly after. Didn't Merrill tell you? Things change. People change their minds." His words felt greased, practiced. I leaned in. "Funny how this one was labeled not for Darrow. That doesn't sound like a change of heart. That sounds like a cover-up." Carlisle stood straighter. "There's no reason to get accusatory. If you have concerns, bring them to court." "I might just do that." His smile vanished. I walked out without another word. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a sleek black SUV pulling into the lot across the street. The driver's door swung open, and Thorne stepped out, adjusting his tie and glancing at his reflection in the side mirror. He didn't see me. I stood under the awning of a bakery, watching as he crossed the street and greeted Carlisle with a slap on the back. They laughed. Like they'd done this before, like they had their parts memorized. I watched them disappear into the building, something hardening in my chest. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't grief clouding my judgment. It was a pattern, and I'd missed it for years. I drove back to the house slowly, the rain now reduced to a drizzle, like even the sky had grown tired of this game. Back inside, I tossed my jacket over the kitchen chair and grabbed my phone. I opened the camera app and began photographing every piece of evidence I had. The altered will, the photograph of Mom and the realtor, the handwritten note, even the label on that damn folder. Then I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I named it Truth. I wasn't sure where this was going yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't letting this rot in silence. Not anymore. I closed the lid gently, walked back to the mantel, and stared at the cracked vase again. "If they want a war," I said aloud, voice steady, "they just chose the wrong ghost." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the creaky old couch, staring at the ceiling while the baseboards ticked and the wind hissed through the window gaps. Morning crept in slow and gray. I made coffee that tasted like cardboard and watched the steam drift like ghosts of better years. By late afternoon, the clouds had thinned, but the air still felt heavy. I sent Thorne a message around noon. "You free to swing by? I need help clearing out Dad's junk." His response came quick. Too quick. "Be there at 4. I set the kitchen table the way you would for an uneasy truce. 2 chairs, 1 folder in the middle, and silence thick as syrup. I didn't touch the folder once I placed it. I didn't want to smudge it with doubt. Thorne pulled up right on time. Sleek car, leather jacket, and that grin he wore like armor. "Nice of you to finally invite me into your little haunted cottage," he said, brushing off his coat like he might catch mildew. "Thought you might want some of Dad's old things," I replied, motioning toward a couple boxes I'd stacked by the door. Then I sat down, nodded toward the folder. "But first we should talk." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." He took the seat across from me, leaned forward, and flipped open the manila folder without hesitation. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then he leaned back and chuckled. That slow, superior kind of laugh people use when they think they've already won. "Oh, this," he said, waving the document like it was a sales flyer. "This is ancient, a rough draft. You really don't know how Dad operated, do you?" "It's signed," I said. "Dated. Notarized." He shrugged. "And then changed. Look, Darrow, you always lived in your little bubble. You were great with Mom's pills, great with checking smoke alarms, but you never understood the business side of things, the grown-up side." I stayed quiet. Letting him keep talking was like turning on a faucet of arrogance. "You want to know the truth?" he said, leaning in until I could smell the mint on his breath. "You were the practice child." I blinked. "What?" He smiled wider. "Yeah, the one they tested all their bad parenting ideas on before getting it right with me. You were the tryout, Darrow, and you stayed that way." I didn't move, didn't flinch, but something in me snapped, quietly like a dry twig breaking under a boot. Thorne stood, pacing the kitchen like it was his boardroom. "Look around you," he said, gesturing toward the cracked linoleum and sagging cabinets. This place matches your ambition perfectly. You always thought hard work would get you somewhere. Newsflash, it doesn't. Results matter. Vision matters. And Dad knew I had both." I clenched my hands under the table, still calm on the surface, still listening. Thorne grabbed one of the boxes by the door. "I'll take the cufflinks and the watch. You can keep the mold." As he headed for the door, he glanced back. "You should be grateful. You got the ghost house. I got the legacy." Then he was gone. Just like that. I sat there for a long time after. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, or maybe I was just finally hearing it. My eyes drifted toward the yellowing wallpaper near the sink, where a patch was peeling in the corner. I remembered being 14, standing right there, pretending to do dishes while Dad took a call in the next room. "Thorne's the show pony. Darrow's the workhorse," he'd said. I thought he meant it kindly back then, like I was dependable. Now I wasn't so sure. Even show ponies get brushed, fed, photographed. Workhorses? They get pushed until their legs give out. I left the kitchen, walked back through the narrow hall and climbed the stairs. Dust stirred in the beam of my flashlight as I reached the attic. The air was thick up there, warm and dry. 100 forgotten boxes surrounded me, like memories stacked and sealed. I opened the old cedar chest near the window, same one Mom used to hide Christmas presents in. Beneath some holiday ornaments and broken lights, I found it. An old black camcorder wrapped in flannel. Still had the label stuck on its side. I popped open the tape slot. Inside, a cassette labeled Xmas Eve 1999. I brought it downstairs, plugged it into my laptop using a converter I hadn't used in over a decade. Static, then flickering images. Our old living room. Mom in her holiday sweater. Dad holding a drink. A young Thorne mimicking my voice in a high-pitched whine while the adults laughed. And then, quiet words. "Mom, don't show this to Darrow. He's too sensitive." "Dad, he'll never know." They smiled, clinking their glasses as if I didn't exist in the next room. I stared at the screen until it went black. Then I saved the file and made a new folder beside Truth. I called it Reckoning. My voice was low, steady, almost calm as I whispered to the empty kitchen. They built their kingdom on my silence. Let's see how it holds when I start speaking. That line stuck with me, echoing through my chest like the tail end of a storm. I whispered it to myself 3 times the next morning before shaving, once more while buttoning my shirt, and again just before stepping into my car and backing out of the gravel drive. The invitation came under the guise of civility. A Sunday afternoon lunch, Thorne had said. "Just the family, Darrow. Let's clear the air before lawyers start mucking everything up." I should have known better, but hope is a stupid muscle. No matter how many times it's torn, it still tries to flex. Thorne's estate sat like a smug monument at the end of a manicured cul-de-sac. Brick perfection, trimmed hedges, and not a single leaf out of place. I parked near the gate and walked up the stone path. the soles of my shoes making polite taps on a life I was never invited to. He opened the door himself, wearing that same tailored shirt he always did for serious meetings. "Come in," he said too warmly. "We're already set up." Set up was the right word. The living room had been staged like a courtroom dressed in throw pillows. Aunt May, looking sharp in her cranberry blazer, sat stiffly in one armchair with a leather briefcase on her lap. Lorraine, our mother, perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded, eyes scanning me like I was the stain on her favorite rug. Between them, a notary I didn't recognize. A quiet woman with tight blonde curls and a clipboard. Thorne gestured toward a single dining chair set apart from the rest. "Let's sit. This won't take long." I didn't move. "Seriously, Darrow," he said, tone suddenly clipped. "It's to avoid misunderstandings. Nobody wants this to get messy." He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like this whole setup wasn't already messier than a butcher's apron. I sat down. Aunt May opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. "This is a property settlement clarification addendum," she said. "It's intended to formalize and protect your inheritance." She slid it across the coffee table like a peace offering. "Your father expressed multiple times that he intended for you to have the country house. This simply records that verbal intent, retroactively." I read the heading. The language was calm, sanitized, the kind of tone that smiles while putting a knife in your side. "There's also a small financial acknowledgement," she added. 15,000 in lieu of any future claims or disputes. Lorraine reached over and gently placed her hand on my knee. "This is what your father wanted, baby. Let's not fight over dust." Dust. That was all this meant to them. My life, my childhood, the empty bedrooms and attic secrets. Just dust. I cleared my throat. "I found a copy of the original will," I said. "It named us both." Thorne leaned back, unimpressed. "Outdated. Dad updated things. You're chasing ghosts," I continued. "I also have a video, Christmas Eve, 1999. Mom told Dad not to show it to me. He said I'd never know." Lorraine's smile turned to something cooler. "We didn't tell you things because you always misunderstood emotions." That landed harder than I expected. Misunderstood emotions. Like I was defective. Aunt May chimed in quickly, professional tone layered with tired patience. "Darrow, families are complicated. Memory is fluid. Let's not try to litigate feelings." Every time I tried to speak, they interrupted, redirected, smoothed over. My words floated in the air for half a second before they were dismissed like static on the radio. I looked at the pen they'd placed beside the document. Polished silver, probably engraved. A gift from a previous betrayal, no doubt. For a moment, I almost reached for it. Almost. Instead, I flipped to the back of the document and wrote, "History is not written by the loudest. It's written by the most patient." I closed the file slowly, stood up, and said nothing. Thorne started to say something, but I was already walking away. Out the front door, past the hydrangeas, down the stone steps that were too clean to be honest. I reached my car, sat in the driver's seat, and exhaled. The windows fogged from the heat of my breath. Behind me, muffled laughter floated out from the house. They thought it was over. I stared at the steering wheel. My hands trembled. Not from fear, but restraint. I could have yelled, thrown the document, made a scene. But that's what they wanted. That's what would have made their case easy. No, I wasn't giving them that. Not today. Not like this. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from an old number. "Hey, remember that tape I gave you senior year? You might want to look at it again." I read it twice, heart slowing to a crawl. Sometimes the past doesn't come knocking. Sometimes it whispers from places you forgot you ever visited. The message glowed on my phone like a match in a dark tunnel. "Hey, remember that tape I gave you senior year? You might want to look at it again." I sat frozen in the driver's seat for a minute, the engine off, the house behind me full of fake laughter and polished lies. That tape had lived in a shoebox for over 20 years, buried under old report cards, birthday cards, and a VHS of Field of Dreams. I never returned to the neighbor. Later that night, after a long shower and a microwave dinner I barely tasted, I found myself standing barefoot in the garage. The cold concrete seeped up through my bones as I pulled the rusted lid off an old trunk shoved under a workbench. Inside, the shoebox sat right where I remembered, faded, slightly dented, but intact. I lifted the lid slowly, brushing away the dust that had settled like years of silence. There it was, a mini DV tape labeled in my own handwriting. Dad's B-Day, 1997. I didn't remember recording it, but I must have, or maybe my friend did. Either way, it was here, and tonight it felt like a key to a door I'd never dared to open. The problem? I didn't have a way to play it. Those tapes were ancient tech now. After a few calls and an awkward visit to my next-door neighbor Ted, who collected electronics the way some folks collect stamps, I left with an old camcorder and a tangled mess of RCA cables that still smelled faintly of basement. Back inside, I cleared space on the kitchen counter, connected the camcorder to my laptop through a borrowed adapter, and held my breath as I slid the tape into place. The screen flickered. Then slowly, grainy footage began to play. A backyard party, fold-out chairs, a grill smoking in the corner. The date stamp in the corner read June 14th, 1997. That was Dad's birthday. There I was, 13 years old, nervously handing him a homemade card. Glitter glue and construction paper. He laughed and ruffled my hair. Then he said something I'd never heard before. One day this house and the farm, if I ever get it back, are yours, kid. Your brother will never know dirt under his nails like you. I paused the footage, rewound it, played it again, over and over. My father's voice, his exact words. Not a memory, not a story, a recorded truth. In the background, Lorraine, my mother, looked annoyed, arms crossed. Thorne, maybe 15 then, swatted at mosquitoes and complained to someone off camera. Anyway, then something caught my eye. Standing by the patio door, just barely in frame, was Aunt May. Watching, listening, she heard it all. So why had she sat across from me earlier, calm and composed, presenting documents meant to erase that truth? I hit pause again, zoomed in slightly. Her face was unmistakable. I opened my laptop's capture tool and grabbed a still image. My dad mid-sentence, my 13-year-old self beaming, and Aunt May off to the side. Frozen in a moment she probably thought no one remembered. I uploaded the clip to my cloud drive, labeled the folder 1977 Testimony. Then I opened a new message and attached the image, captioning it simply, "I remember everything, and now I can prove it." I didn't hit send yet, not yet, but I stared at it for a long while. A strange calm settled over me. Not the fragile kind you get before the storm, but the kind that comes when you realize the storm is already inside you, and you're no longer afraid to let it out. Later, after shutting down the camcorder and closing the laptop, I reached for my wallet. Tucked behind my license was that stupid leaf-shaped napkin from the first night, Chapter 1, if you will. The family dinner, the grand performance, the napkin that once symbolized tradition, legacy, connection. I turned it over in my hand. All I saw now was a prop, a trick, something meant to make me feel included in a legacy that was never meant for me. My fingers trembled, not from sadness, but clarity. They taught me to be silent, to nod, to smile, to accept half-truths as kindness. They never taught me what I'd do once I stopped being, and I don't think they ever expected me to walk through Thorne's office door that morning. I didn't call ahead, didn't knock, just pushed through the heavy glass door at 9:01 a.m. sharp. The receptionist tried to stop me with a rehearsed smile, but one look at me and the flash drive in my fist, and she froze. Thorne's office sat at the end of a long corridor, dressed in polished wood and expensive silence. He was on a call when I walked in, but he ended it without looking up. Just one finger held up as if I were some delivery guy interrupting something real. I stepped forward and dropped the flash drive on his desk. It made a small, definitive clink on the mahogany. "You lied," I said, voice steady. "Our father left something behind. His voice. It's on that drive." Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, unfazed. He gave the flash drive a glance, then lifted his eyes to mine. "You broke into my house?" His tone was cold, almost amused. I didn't flinch. That tape was already mine. I just finally watched it. He picked up the drive, rolled it between his fingers, then plugged it into his laptop. The room filled with the grainy sound of our father's voice. Clear, unmistakable. One day this house and the farm, if I ever get it back, are yours, kid? Thorne didn't say anything for a long beat. Then he closed the laptop gently. Too bad, he said finally. Too bad Dad never updated the will. The smirk forming on his lips was almost cinematic, but the words that followed felt like a knife. I filed suit, he continued, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. Alleging that you forged evidence and made defamatory claims to influence probate court. I blinked, not understanding. What the hell are you talking about? You sent a clip to Aunt May, he said, voice still maddeningly calm. She forwarded it to her law firm. Do you know how fast word gets around? Then he leaned in. Your bank accounts are frozen, Darrow, pending a forensic review. Until then, well, I hope you weren't planning on buying groceries. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He handed me a printout. Account balance, $38.12. I left without a word. The receptionist avoided eye contact as I passed her desk. Outside, the sun had no warmth, just glare. I climbed into my truck and slammed the door so hard it shook. And then I lost it. I slammed both hands against the steering wheel, again and again, teeth clenched. Not from pain, but rage, frustration, the kind that builds over years until one more injustice pushes you into that space between fury and despair. My hands stung, my chest heaved, and then came the flashbacks, uninvited. Dad's voice again. This will be yours. Mom turning away, always avoiding eye contact when Thorne made decisions for her, and her whisper years ago after one of our arguments. Don't expect fairness from people who benefit from injustice. How long had this been the plan? They were never a family, they were a system, and I'd been trained to serve quietly inside it. My phone buzzed on the console. I didn't recognize the number, but the message stopped me cold. Meet me. I remember more than I let on, and you're not the only one they heard. Aunt May. Before, we met at a diner just off Route 12, one of those places with coffee that tastes like burnt toast but costs $1.09 with free refills. She was already there, sitting in the corner booth, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. I should have said something earlier, she said as I slid into the seat. Thorne did to my brother, my husband, what he's doing to you now. Papered over truth with legality, cut him out of his inheritance too, and I let it happen. Why? I asked. She stared into her coffee. Because I thought he'd spare me if I stayed quiet. A beat passed. Then she added, I was wrong. We sat there in silence, surrounded by the clinking of silverware and the low hum of country music on the radio. Finally, I nodded. I'm not going away, May. Not this time. Back at the house, still leaning, still damp from last night's rain, I tossed my jacket on the chair and sat at the kitchen table. I grabbed a legal pad, flipped it open, and started writing. Names, dates, connections. Every lie, every witness, every piece of tape or memory I could trace back to something concrete. Outside, a semi-truck rumbled down the main road, causing the floorboards to tremble for a few seconds. The house shuddered, but my hand didn't. He threw the first punch, I said aloud, pressing harder with the pen. This time, I'm going to throw the last. The thought repeated like a mantra as I adjusted my tie in the reflection of a vending machine near the courthouse entrance. My suit wasn't new, but it was pressed, clean, and just stiff enough to remind me this morning mattered. I gripped the brown envelope close to my chest and stepped inside Multnomah County Courthouse. The chill of the marble floor crawled through my shoes. Security waved me through without hassle, though one guard gave me a sympathetic look, as if he already knew the odds. Inside the courtroom, the tension clung to the air like cigarette smoke. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, trying to ignore the whispers behind me. That's when I saw her, Lorraine, my mother. She sat 2 rows behind, clutching a folded handkerchief in her lap, eyes darting away when they met mine. Then came Thorne. He swept in like a man arriving to close a deal, flanked by two men in dark suits I didn't recognize. His stride had rhythm, like he'd choreographed the moment in his head. He didn't glance my way, just nodded at his attorneys and took his place with that same smug posture he wore in every school photo from age 10. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Harlow entered, glasses low on her nose, robe flowing like a storm cloud. We were called to order. No delays. "Mr. Darrow," she said, flipping through her binder, "you've submitted supplemental material?" I stood, voice steady despite the buzz in my chest. "Yes, Your Honor. It's a short audio file. I believe it bears directly on my father's intent." The USB was already labeled and queued. The court technician plugged it in, and then it played. My father's voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the room. "If anything happens to me, the house goes to Darrow. It's not much, but it's honest." The courtroom didn't move for a breath. Then a wave of hushed murmurs broke across the gallery. Even Lorraine's chin lifted, her eyes wet but alert. Judge Harlow raised a hand. "Quiet, please. Court will recess for 20 minutes while I consult with counsel regarding admissibility." I turned to sit. Thorne hadn't blinked once. When we returned, something shifted. Thorne stood without being asked, handed the judge a crisp document in a plastic sleeve. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this newly located version of my father's will. Notarized and dated one day after the audio in question." I froze. The judge adjusted her glasses and read. "Signed, March 23rd, lists the estate divided solely to Thorne E. Cartwright." A sharp inhale came from Lorraine's seat. "I've never seen that," she whispered loud enough for everyone near her to hear. "Not once." Judge Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Cartwright?" Lorraine stood, shaky. "My husband could barely write his name by then. He had arthritis in both hands. I used to sign his checks for him." But it was too late. The document had a real notary seal. Her word, though heartfelt, wasn't enough. The judge nodded slowly. "We'll adjourn for now. I'm placing a hold on all property transitions until verification is complete." It felt like the floor dropped beneath me. This wasn't just about facts anymore. It was a game of optics, perception, paper versus truth. And right now, Thorne had the cleaner copy. In the hallway outside, I met with my court-appointed lawyer. He was young, well-meaning, but clearly rattled. "Real seal, real date," he said, shaking his head. "We can request a handwriting analysis, but that'll take weeks, possibly months." "I don't have weeks," I muttered. From the bench nearby, Lorraine spoke again. "It's not your father's handwriting," she said, firm this time. I'd bet my soul on that. It wasn't just desperation in her voice. It was something new. Guilt, maybe. Or finally, loyalty. The next hour passed in silence. I sat alone, watched pigeons outside land, and lived again, free in ways I hadn't felt in years. When I finally returned home, dusk was settling. The house greeted me with its usual creaks and sighs, but tonight I didn't feel alone inside it. I stood in the living room for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Then I saw it. On the mantel, coated in dust, sat a cedar chess king, no taller than my thumb. I hadn't noticed it in years. My father carved it during a camping trip in the Cascades when I was 13. I remembered how he handed it to me by the fire, his voice low, firm. "In the game of kings," he said, "sometimes the quiet piece is the one that checkmates." I wiped the dust off the piece, held it in my palm, and for the first time in months, I smiled. They were playing games, but I wasn't here to play. I was building my own board. The courthouse smelled like old paper and stale coffee, just like every other time I'd stepped through its glass doors. But today, something was different. There was no fear in my gut, no hesitation in my stride. I walked straight down the center aisle, past the polished benches and the familiar frowns, and took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Lorraine sat quietly in the second row, dressed in navy blue, her hands clutched around the same handkerchief I'd seen before. Her eyes didn't meet mine, but she was here, again. That counted for something. The bailiff called order. Judge Harlow adjusted her robe, peering over those half-moon glasses of hers. "Mr. Cartwright, are you prepared to proceed?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We call forensic analyst Dr. Kelly Sims to the stand. Dr. Sims was a no-nonsense woman in her early 50s, her gray streak bun tight and her blouse buttoned high. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The courtroom hushed as she placed her evidence binder on the table beside her. My team conducted a full analysis of the document presented as an updated will, she began. What we found was illuminating. She clicked a remote. A slide popped up on the small monitor. The ink used was manufactured 6 months after Mr. Cartwright's death. Not only that, click. The printer used to produce the document matches the serial number of a brother HLL-twin.refime.EW registered to Mr. Thorne Cartwright's personal office. There it was. The room reacted before the judge could bang her gavel. A wave of audible gas swept the room. Even Thorne's 2 attorneys flinched. I turned to look at my brother. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The mask cracked. Judge Harlow leaned forward. Mr. Cartwright, do you have a response? Thorne shifted in his chair, eyes darting to his counsel. There must be some mistake. I wasn't. Enough, she cut in. Counsel, please sit. We'll now address this matter formally. From there it unraveled quickly. Objections sputtered. Momentum vanished. Judge Harlow declared Thorne in contempt pending investigation. There'd be a hearing for potential disbarment. He didn't say a word as the gavel fell, just stared down at the polished wood grain of his desk, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. As the room emptied, Lorraine rose from her seat. I thought she'd follow Thorne out. Instead, she walked straight toward me. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. Her voice was barely audible. I knew he was lying, she whispered. I was scared of losing both of you. I didn't answer right away. The words hung there, fragile, like spun glass. I nodded, swallowing the heat behind my eyes. You lost me the day you stayed quiet, but today, maybe you started earning it back. She nodded too, her lips trembling, then turned and walked slowly toward the exit. Months passed. Spring bloomed around the old house, weeds giving way to trimmed grass and clean siding. I didn't hire anyone. I rebuilt it myself, board by board, nail by nail. A ritual, a reckoning. The cedar chess king sat on the mantel now, freshly polished. It had its place, and so did I. One afternoon, as I was repainting the window frames, a small gray sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. Lorraine stepped out, holding a cardboard box. She didn't walk up the porch steps, just stood there, cradling the box like something sacred. I found some old photos, she said. Thought you might want them. I didn't invite her in, but I walked down the steps, took the box in my arms, and nodded. That was all. Weeks later, a Saturday morning brought laughter to my porch. Jake, the boy from next door, stood by the front stoop, fidgeting with a worn chess set I'd left out. You want to play? He asked. I chuckled. Sure, but fair warning. I used to be pretty good. We sat on the porch floor, the board between us. As we moved pieces back and forth, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Older, yes, weathered, but solid, the way a man should be when he finally stands on his own ground. People talk about inheritance like it's about money, I said, not just to Jake, but to something bigger. But sometimes the only thing you inherit is silence, and the choice to end it. Jake looked up. What does that mean? I smiled. It means even the quietest piece on the board can win the game. The king in my hand felt warm from the sun. In the game of kings, sometimes the quiet piece is the one that checkmates.